It's been almost 20 years since reverse dieting first hit the scene in health and fitness. People are still missing some of these crucial components of figuring out how to bring clients back to maintenance calories.
What's up and welcome to Sam Miller Science, where you're joining me just over a decade into my personal journey of working to bridge the gap between metabolism, macros, muscle, and medicine, all while helping coaches scale the impact that they desire and deserve. If you are here, thank you so much for listening and for trusting me to help you elevate your coaching game or to lead you in your transformation to realize your true potential. In either case, each week I'll be sharing my methods, models, and message to serve as leverage for your specific goals. Without further ado, let's get on to today's show.
Now, this concept goes by a number of different terms. Some people call it reverse dieting, recovery diets, but the basic premise is adding calories or food after a period of restriction when someone's trying to get leaner and lose body fat. So they would have their initial dieting phase and obviously subtract calories throughout that process as they're looking to get leaner. And because of that reduced energy availability, we want to then alleviate some of the effects of metabolic adaptation that have occurred, even if they're just transient, from the reduction in calories and potential increase in physical activity. But I see this sometimes go sideways when people don't account for the differences either between their own body type, activity level, and health history, or if this is a health and fitness coach guiding someone through a different sort of reverse diet or recovery diet, they miss a few crucial components that can make or break your success with this approach. So first, we have to understand that the term reverse dieting wasn't necessarily of scientific origin. It's something that in the bodybuilding community and in forums, people would talk about this concept. And I think it first rose to mainstream popularity around 2014, but people were doing it for quite some time prior to that, probably even in the early 2000s. The idea of adding these calories back, or even in bodybuilding, people would have an off season and then their contest prep. But in terms of social media, I think it really started to gain steam around the time that Instagram came on the scene around 2014. The term started to appear in scientific literature more so between 2010 and then even into 2020 and beyond. So you'll see different terms depending on the situation, but what's important to understand is this idea of caloric increase and getting back towards maintenance calories. So this term became increasingly popular in the mainstream fitness community because people thought basically I can eat more and lose body fat. And that can be misleading, especially when used in more of just a marketing hype way and people not realizing why people might be seeing success with reverse diets in the first place. In one of those instances, it needs to be mentioned that for some clients where they were being very restrictive and then maybe overeating on the weekends or even binging, that was leading to their lack of progress towards their physique goals. And so when they reverse dieted or even increased calories a bit, it felt like they were eating more across 7 days. They just had less extreme on the weekends and during the week. So that's not the focus of today's episode, but realize I am cognizant that in some cases, clients may have had such deviation between their restrictive weekly eating and then maybe having more extreme caloric intake on a Friday, a Saturday, or Sunday that was impacting their weekly energy balance. So the mainstream rise partially was due to marketing hype, but there was also a level of applicability from a physiological perspective. And some people did truly need to spend time in a different nutritional season where they weren't constantly trying to restrict calories or be in a prolonged deficit. And that's really where the meat and potatoes of today's episode will begin. So let's talk about where people go wrong with reverse dieting and how to kind of make the most of this process. We're not going to get into the granular add 100 calories here or X amount of protein there. We're going to focus more so on what people do wrong so you can avoid these missteps and see the best results either for yourself, or if you're a health and fitness coach, you can use this with your clients. So view this almost as a checklist and some of the things that you should not do so that you can stay the course and get the best possible results. The first mistake is treating the reverse diet the same for everyone. That should never be the case because people have different health histories, different levels of insulin sensitivity, different levels of caloric restriction or history of chronic dieting. We need to account for the depth, duration, and frequency of past diets. So depth meaning how far did we go in terms of caloric subtraction, the duration, how long was this person trying to lose body fat or in a calorie deficit, and the frequency. So someone who's been on a bunch of diets very recently versus someone who's only done one intense diet over the last 5 to 10 years and spent most of their life at maintenance calories is probably going to have a slightly different response to the nutritional stimulus. So number one, should not treat the reverse diet the same for everyone. And then people also have different stress levels, different gut issues, different training styles. Maybe we're coming out of a period where in the diet phase, we had to back off of training a little bit. We're trying to maintain muscle, but without exceeding our recovery capacity. And maybe with an increase in food, you're looking to actually push training further. That's going to be a very different situation than someone who's maybe keeping training and movement levels the same due to their daily schedule if they can't accommodate that, but you're making nutritional changes simultaneously. So account for those variables. What is this client's insulin sensitivity like? Do you have an idea of their fasting insulin, A1C, and fasting glucose? What are their current body fat levels? How is their digestion? Because if you go and you just try to drastically increase carbohydrates and this person is struggling with their digestion, those fermentable carbohydrates could potentially contribute to gut dysbiosis, current overgrowth they have, and make matters worse when it comes to digestion. So that's something we have to account for with all clients. Now, if this is an athlete specifically or someone who competes in physique sports, we need to be asking, when is their next competition? How much time do we have before the next diet phase? How bad were the effects of the restrictive dieting? And we can see that both in biofeedback, and if you're someone who's trained and understands health testing and lab work, you can see some of the effects of metabolic adaptation in the labs. Now, we have to ask, in this case, calories may need to be increased faster in someone who has future competition goals, and we need to alleviate those symptoms of metabolic adaptation as quickly as possible, or to address the problematic biofeedback and get them back to a place where training performance can improve, and at maintenance calories and beyond, beginning to focus on maybe more of a muscle building season instead of being so hyper focused only on fat loss. So consider those timelines. And even if this isn't an athlete or someone who competes in physique sports, maybe they have other performance goals that may require an increase in calories, and that needs to be accounted for as well. If you have someone and they're not someone who's stepping on stage, and maybe they don't have a performance goal or a high rocks or a CrossFit competition or a race coming up, you'd still want to consider the timeline of when the person might be looking to diet again, because that's going to impact your decisions around their nutritional strategy. Now, ideally, in a perfect situation, the person says, hey, coach, I'm ready to follow your lead in terms of when I'm ready to diet next. But if you've ever worked with a client in actual clinical practice, you know that sometimes that's not always how that conversation goes. So a little bit of planning can go a really long way. Number two, aside from the health differences of the client, we have to consider the psychological differences. So clients have different sort of fears and aversions, and maybe are hesitant to add certain amounts of food. Now, the level of prioritization and the speed at which you need to add food may be more important for someone who's been really intensely prepping for the last 16 to 18 weeks, or someone who's done a natural bodybuilding competition, right? Now, it's not to say that it's not important to get back to maintenance calories for the average dieter or Jane Doe who's just been trying to lose some body fat, but she may have different sort of fears or aversions that a seasoned competitor who's been through different stages of nutrition might not have those same sort of fears. If anything, they may be looking forward to adding food very quickly, and you may need to actually keep that in check so that the person doesn't gain excess body fat or develop an unhealthy relationship with food and their meals. So account for the psychological state of the client. Each client's going to be different. You need to have open conversation around what that's going to look like, and understand, hey, when we have this reverse dieting or recovery diet period, when you increase calories, you may actually have some increased hunger sensations. Here's what to expect. Here's why we're doing this. And it's very important that even though we're in a phase where maybe we're adding more food, we still need a similar level of adherence to when maybe we were pushing to try to lose body fat. We can't just go completely off the rails and play macro Tetris just because we're now adding some food. But with adding those calories and having increased energy availability, we should have more wiggle room to fit in certain foods that maybe are more calorically dense that you wouldn't have had the opportunity to do previously. But this should be a time where we're focused, not just, so moving on from that psychological perspective, understand when people have been dieting, they put themselves at risk for different nutritional deficiencies. And so when you're adding food, yes, There's some titration in the macronutrients, but what so many people miss is this is an opportunity to increase your micronutrient status as well and improve that. Now, ideally, when you were dieting, when you made food substitutions or you restricted calories, you tried to offset the decrease that typically happens in micronutrient status. So most people, let's say they subtract 500 calories, they're not backfilling the micronutrients along the way. Now, that can be done with supplementation, or maybe you're taking something that was a less nutritious choice or less micronutrient dense food, and you're backfilling that. And maybe you went from, in your 500 calorie subtraction, you tried to include more foods that had more vitamins and minerals. That's typically not the case for all people. What often happens is they eat the same foods they were eating before, they just try to decrease the portions. But really intelligent dieting, even if there's a caloric subtraction, we may try to pick a food that's a little more voluminous. Maybe it has more micronutrients. Maybe it helps with satiety, since we are working with a different sort of energy budget than we were before. So all of that has to be considered. So when making your nutritional choices, consider both the psychological state and then also the physiological state of the client, which I really more so addressed towards the beginning of the episode. Now, this third one is very important. I'm making a category of its own. And I have an entire separate post on this on Instagram where I talk about situations where people need to pump the brakes on reverse diets and maybe an indication that it's not going as planned. And that is the case of gut issues. You may need to address the underlying gut dysfunction first before trying to push food higher and higher and higher. Because if the person is not absorbing and assimilating nutrients optimally, if they have high stress levels, if they're struggling with even blood glucose management, or they have systemic inflammation, you're not going to get the best results out of that reverse diet or recovery diet. Now, it's not to say that the person doesn't need to add food. They probably do. But in order to compensate right now, what we may need to do is decrease activity a little bit, pull back some stress. And yes, we want to add food. We do want to push that higher, but hopefully we can resolve some of these gut symptoms first or on the way, and being very mindful of the food choices that we're making while we're looking to get this person back to more of a maintenance phase with their nutrition. If you push too fast, add calories too rapidly, strain the person's digestion, they may just be left feeling bloated and distended. And that can be difficult from a psychological perspective if you've taken someone who's pretty lean and just went through a dieting phase, and now you're pushing food in a way that's exacerbating gut issues, causing bloat. They're not going to look visibly as good. And that's already a psychological challenge after a diet phase, is seeing yourself gain body fat. Now couple that with bloat and distension from gut issues, and you have a recipe for disaster when that person is looking in the mirror. So understand the gut is a crucial part of optimizing your success with adding food, with any nutritional strategy that you choose, and trying to get someone back to maintenance calories and beyond, or even if they're considering moving into some type of surplus to try to build muscle. Not to say that you can't do that or recomp at lower calorie levels. It's just many people choose that strategy for reasons related to performance, or maybe they're trying to move up a weight class. There's a lot of different examples where that may play out, where they've made a choice to increase calories pretty dramatically. Now, mistake number 4 outside of gut health is people use the wrong calculated maintenance calories. And I typically see this with beginner to intermediate nutrition coaches who haven't worked with as many people in actual coaching practice, or maybe someone who's newer if they're trying to calculate things on their own or design their own nutrition plans. And you'll even see this too. Sometimes, I think as AI continues to grow, some of these artificial intelligence platforms that haven't worked with people in real life, but just have access to a bunch of blogs and Reddit threads and Google searches and maybe a little bit of research, they will also make this mistake as well. Understand that your predicted total daily energy expenditure changes after prolonged dieting, and with changes in things like your body size. So if you are now a different weight, we have to account for that and understand after periods of dieting that may impact our predicted maintenance. You may have lower than predicted maintenance calories. So even what it should be on paper, that might not actually be where you're maintaining your weight. And remember, maintenance calories are more like a sliding scale or a window. It's not a singular target. It's not like a dartboard where we're going to perfectly throw the dart in the middle of the board. There's a bit of a sliding scale or spectrum where someone can maintain their weight. And some of this depends on their activity levels. and other changes in their lifestyle that need to be accounted for when building out this overall plan. So if you weigh less, if you're experiencing transient effects of metabolic adaptation, you may have a lower than predicted TDEE. There are also certain health conditions that lead to a lower than predicted TDEE, even if on paper or based on where you thought they were, or when you started working with the client, or maybe you were planning this in terms of your own nutrition, on paper, you might have thought your maintenance was significantly higher. So this is where sometimes people will even overshoot their own numbers because of failing to account for how each subsequent diet may impact what's happening for them metabolically. So predicted TDEE, or even the idea of total daily energy expenditure, is important, but just remember there's flux. It's a moving target, a sliding scale, and in different seasons of your training and nutrition, you may have to recalibrate and adjust that. You're not going to use the same number forever. Bouncing back to the same number may actually leave you getting a different set of results than you did previously. So please do not use the wrong predicted maintenance. And this is why sometimes having something like a food log, a 7-day food journal, and following your weight trends and your overall averages can be even more powerful or equally as powerful as some of these calculators. The calculators are used to give you a general idea. They're not perfect. And most people don't have granular data. They don't have their exact body fat levels. It's not like every single client is doing a DEXA scan and every person has the perfect activity multiplier. So you may be using these calculators and think you have these perfect formulas, but this is why so many coaches struggle when it's time to play this out in practice with actual humans. Number 5 is not understanding how stress levels and training are going to impact your reverse diet or recovery diet game plan. Again, I'm using both of these terms because different people have different preferences of how they like to bring their clients through these phases. And I think recovery diets are super popular, especially in like the natural bodybuilding community. So there's different ways to approach this. I guess you'd say the phrase different ways to skin a cat when it comes to reverse recovery diets. But if you don't understand how stress levels are impacting the client, how sleep quality and their complete lifestyle impacts their success with this phase of their nutrition, you are going to miss the mark. So again, you are not just someone who is a macro calculator. If you're working with clients in their health and fitness, you need to look at all of these components in order to make the best decisions related to their health. And that's why even people who market themselves as macro coaches or think that they need to be an expert or specialize in macros still need to have a deeper understanding of internal health. Many coaches make surface level adjustments that actually impact what's going on with client physiology. You'd say 100% of coaches, right? They either titrate portions, they make changes to exercise plans, they change daily physical activity levels, even non-exercise physical activity, and all of those changes impact client physiology. But so many coaches coming into the industry are not actually educated on physiology. And that's why inside our functional nutrition and metabolism specialization, a big focus is understanding the why behind a lot of these changes and what can we expect downstream with each subsequent adjustment. And then being able to follow clients' qualitative and quantitative data along the way to make the best possible programming decisions and have a clear mind in that check-in process and over-the-shoulder support along the way. Now, it's not to say that you can't learn to see this play out in time with enough reps with clients. You probably could. It tends to take significantly longer, and seeing these different cases and avatars play out versus getting the case exposure and also having the understanding, the education from a physiological perspective to make this work. So if you're someone who wants to really specialize in this topic or help a lot of clients after seasons of chronic dieting, or maybe you even work with competitors, it's imperative that you understand some of these deeper components, things like insulin sensitivity, things like gut health. You shouldn't only be making decisions related to macronutrients and hoping that it's just going to play out for every client. At that point, you're basically making it a coin toss. And in my opinion, that can be a little reckless and irresponsible if you're doing that with a large volume of people and not understanding how this may play out long term. So please avoid this mistake. Know when to pump the brakes on this approach. This is something that's gotten super popular. It continues to be popular. And I'm amazed that even 10 to 20 years later, people are still making these mistakes, very similar mistakes that happened when the concept first came out in the industry. So if anything, just learn what not to do first, and then become a little bit more of an expert in the topic as you continue to grow. So please avoid, pushing calories super hard on people who have terrible gut issues. Avoid, making these massive changes without addressing stress and lifestyle. You should always consider training and activity levels when making nutritional adjustments, but doing that without having the full picture on someone's health can be problematic. Realize that different situations like contest prep, physique sport, performance athletes, and general lifestyle clients may warrant a different approach in terms of both the speed and volume of increase that you're pursuing after their diet. Someone who tried to make a weight class for MMA or UFC is different than someone who's stepping on stage that doesn't have a weight class restriction. Someone who's a triathlete or, maybe even a runner, going to have different nutritional needs and macronutrient profiles than someone who's a power lifter in a strength sport. So there's nuance to these conversations. And this episode is just really trying to keep people out of trouble, more or less, because I still see these topics discussed on Instagram, social media, YouTube, TikTok. And unfortunately, this can actually have some negative impacts on people's health in the process. So not only will they be upset in terms of their physical progress and how they look, but the deeper concern is the health issues that arise along the way. So we want to do this as safely as possible. And while people think it's safer, right? People have the misconception that, well, reverse dieting is just safer because all I'm doing is adding food. It can't really be as bad as like crash dieting someone, right? Like crash dieting would be the worst. This must be the healthier thing. And while certainly slashing someone's calories and crash dieting is bad and has ill effects when it comes to someone's health, you can still lead to some potential problems if you're being reckless with your reverse dieting approach. I hope this episode was informative. If you learned something new, please share the show. You can support the work that my team and I do here by leaving a 5-star rating and review on any audio platform. If you're on YouTube, hit that thumbs up button and the subscribe button so that you never miss a new episode. Many of you tune in regularly. You leave comments or ratings, but you don't always hit that subscribe button. So you're missing new episodes as they come out and when we launch new videos. If you're listening on audio right now, realize we do have the video versions on Spotify. So we've gotten some great feedback on those. If you haven't checked them out, the video is a great complement to audio. And I think Spotify's done a ton with their overall podcast interface over the past few years. I used to be a big Apple podcast person. I'm pretty much listening to my stuff on Spotify and tuning in. You get different show notes and transcripts and the video version of some of your favorite shows. So make sure you're subscribed, share this. If this resonated with you, tag me in your stories at Sam Miller Science and where you post the show. I always appreciate it and try to connect with you guys individually in the process. Thanks so much for tuning in today, and I'll talk to you guys in the next episode.